Okay.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was fun. We got to do a little more back and forth with him since not a ton of people came in to ask questions. We never had a full room.
Yeah.
On the other hand, not a lot of people showed up.
A lot of people complain that they're working at night or live on the opposite side of the world and are too busy hanging on.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a problem that has a solution, though.
Well, one solution was that we have it during an earlier period of time, maybe on a weekend day.
Oh, okay. So like maybe a Saturday or Sunday during the day for us, and not too late at night for like Europeans.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might work.
For those who live in the wonderful land of Oz.
Yep.
"12 Pacific works for South America, Europe, North America, etc." I suppose, Ruben.
Yeah, Sunday would be fun if Dr. Price could do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea what his weekend schedule is like.
Yeah. So I'm nearing the end of What is a Gospel, and I read in part of it. He's talking about the eschatological attitude of the Gospels, and a little bit in Paul's letters, mainly 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And he briefly mentions, he talks about Mark and Luke, and then he talks about Matthew and John. And let me find the exact spot. Okay. So he's talking about the theories of the composition of the Gospel of John. The Gospel arose out of a reinterpretation of a signs source, or the Gospel evolved from a single stream of tradition. I just wanted to hear what you guys thought as far as the composition of the work, if you favored one of those or the other, or a completely different one.
Oh, buddy. You know, I'm not real big knowledgeable about the Gospel of John. I wish I knew more. But yeah, I've heard that various sources that were independent sources, the Logos hymn, the Signs source or Signs Gospel, whatever you want to call it. Also, that it could be the actually earliest form of Christology.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's being, it just doesn't necessarily mean that high Christology didn't come first. I mean,
wait, you mean that if you mean the hypothetical signs source would have had a low Christology, or lower than we find, say, in the rest of the Gospel of John, which has a very high Christology. Is that what you mean?
Well, there was a theory that the high Christology part came first because it reflects supposedly the high Christology of, like, the Pauline epistles, for instance.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like the highest is the earliest for some reason, but I have not looked into the arguments for that. Unless somebody else has. Enlighten us.
Another thing he mentions is, he goes on to say, on either of these two views, the synthetic model of composition posited for the synoptics seems appropriate also for the fourth gospel. If one holds to the existence of a sign source, then the Gospel of John came into being either as a synthesis of miracle and passion traditions, as in Mark. And then he says this weird thing in parentheses. I have no clue what he's talking about. So maybe if you guys do, you could tell me. This is in parentheses. If the Semeia, S-E-M-E-I-A, source was only a miracle gospel, hyphen, so Robinson and Nickel, I'm assuming he's referring to scholars there, or a synthesis of a miracle plus passion slash gospel, or gospel, I guess I'd say, and discourse material. The union of these varying materials with their different perspectives resulted in a reinterpretation of them in a new whole. So essentially, I guess whoever composed it grabbing from a bunch of different sources and kind of mashing them all together into reinterpreting all of them into a unified whole. So I guess that's his third alternative to being either from a sign source or a single stream of tradition. But do you guys know what he's talking about? Semeia or Semia source?
You know, I just read that the other day, and it even gave me the definition of the word, and I cannot remember it. I'm drawing a blank.
Okay, well, let me see if I can just Google it real quick. Semia source.
I know there's a journal called that, a higher critical journal.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, okay.
I
So
don't think it influenced the Gospel of John.
Apparently, it's just another word for signs source.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so let me look at the footnote, though, because he mentions in 29...
We'll find it.
Well, I think that, the Johannine community could have, gone on quite a while before it even adopted any kind of literature or had
totally.
any kind of stuff, so all that could have came, and most people are now starting to think that the Gospel of John was at least influenced heavily by Mark, and also apparently by Luke. So, all those different things could have only just come together at a late date, but there was probably a set of beliefs and approaches that went back quite a ways without any kind of literary body of literature existing.
Yeah. Let me just look at that footnote. Yeah, so that's James M. Robinson, the Johannine trajectory. That's apparently, I guess he... Yeah, he proposes that there was some signs gospel material, or signs source material that was used in the composition of the Gospel of John.
So how do you spell that word? S-E-M?
S-E-M-E-I-A. Semeia, I'm guessing.
Okay. Yeah, there was one particularly really good edition that comes in Logos Bible software that I thought was really cool. It was a whole issue devoted to something. Okay.
There's another interesting point he's talking about when he's summing up, well, I'll just read it. Assuming the two-source theory, Matthew can be understood as a synthesis of Mark, Q, and oral tradition peculiar to the evangelist church, that is, to Matthew's church. This new whole has three widely recognized characteristics. One, it looks in many respects like a book of community rules with analogies to community rule 1QS from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Didache. As such, it offers guidance to some early Christian church. And two, it is unlike manuals of instruction, however, in that its teaching is given in the context of the career of its hero figure. The discourses are set down into a narrative framework of Jesus-like, with definite links between the life and the collected teaching. One finds nothing like this in community rule or the Didache. And then 3, there are within Matthew a number of passages that read like defenses against a false image of the church as Savior. For example, the genealogy 1 through 17, the baptism 13 through 17, the story refuting the charge that Jesus' disciples stole his body from the tomb. So in other words, it seems like Matthew's addressing some possible false impressions from his view floating around that he was aware of. And it says, this points to an apologetic function for at least part of the narrative. The gospel in its present form and with these traits is unlike the sources from which it was composed. They were taken up and reinterpreted by their inclusion in a whole with a distinctively new perspective. So again, that sounds like what he's kind of proposing for Gospel of John.
Yeah, it's always been very interesting.
And
some more studying.
Yeah, and Dr. Price raised some really interesting things too last week when he was talking about it seems like there's a lot in John's Gospel that seems to be like corrective material in the same way that stuff in Matthew seems to be. Like in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane scene in John has a totally different character than in the synoptics.
Yeah, I never understood why there was any really question of there was a relationship between John's Gospel and the synoptics. I mean, it seems pretty clear. I mean, the exact nature of that relationship, I'm not sure. You know, a lot of it, like you say, seems to be like polemical writing, just deliberately answering things. But it does seem to be a relationship, and why that's still debatable is just, I'm not, confuses me.
Well, I guess, I mean, you know, there's always, like he always says, you know, all this stuff is at best probabilistic. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is tantalizingly, there are some tantalizing things in there that seem to be corrective, like you said, polemical writings or apologetic writings, say correcting misconceptions that were floating around at the time. Well, like on the Sermon on the Mount. Sorry, yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Okay, just first time I came in, my audio was messed up, so I wanted to check.
Oh, no, we can hear you.
All right, I just want to mention as well that when it comes to John's relationship to the synoptics, I've come across actually a PhD dissertation that only came out, let's see, just a couple years ago, called John's Use of Matthew. And this one you can actually find online. It's by James Baker from Vanderbilt University.
James Beaker?
Yes, Barker, I'm sorry, B-A-R-K-E-R. I found that
you can put
somebody
in the
posted
chat
on
would be
Facebook,
great.
and so at least some people are now even trying to make the argument that even Matthew influenced John's Gospel.
Well, that's kind of what Dr. Price was talking about, and he was going off of Bultmann, who was saying that there seems to be a lot in John's Gospel that seems to have a corrective nature to a lot of what we're presented with in the synoptics. And as one of his examples, he gave a couple, but the Garden of Gethsemane thing was one of them. But yeah, I guess it just depends on what, you know. He probably, it seems like he was familiar with at least one of the synoptics, but maybe even more of them. I don't know.
Yeah, just from what I can tell, people have been making cogent arguments that John knew all the synoptics now.
Oh, is this the position of Barker in his dissertation here?
Well, if he's arguing Matthew influenced John, and since others are arguing Mark and Luke also influenced John, that would say that it's hard to believe at this point that John must have been, you know, completely to himself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to read this dissertation I just downloaded. And for anyone that didn't already notice, I've posted a link to the PDF in the chat there. So
Yeah, David Kunzman saw John's Gospel written in a more sophisticated Greek. I think it's just the opposite, isn't it? It's usually considered not exactly highbrow.
no, it's kind of like a yeah. I've heard that it's kind of like a sloppy, yeah, low form of Greek. And isn't Revelation also just very yeah, folky? Isn't Revelation also the Greek in Revelation is really bad, I've heard.
Yeah, I was reading that in that book that was posted in the Bible Geek listeners from one of the listeners that published on Kindle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I believe he mentions that in there. But I also read somewhere that, both John and Revelation are not as bad as some people try to make it out. So I guess it's subjective.
Yeah, I don't speak or write or read Greek, so I have to defer to experts. And I know they all have different opinions, so I don't really know.
I was looking once at the actual Greek of John, and it does lend itself very well to Hebrew translations, so that's something to think about.
Well, yeah, aren't there some people arguing that Revelation was a very old document that was kind of retrofitted with Christian themes later on?
Yeah, it began life as some kind of Jewish document, not necessarily pre-Christian or proto-Christian. It could have been a form of
contemporaneous
all to itself that maybe just died out, or was assimilated into Christianity at some point. It's hard to say. But, well, what's the evidence that they even existed? Well, I think parts of Revelation are the actual literature of some groups like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they were, redacted and went through Christian interpolation and expansion and stuff. So it's not all strictly Jewish. I mean, it was at some point landed in the hands of Christians for a lot of additional reworking, I would imagine.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me because it seemed like in the region at that time there was like kind of an apocalyptic fervor. I mean, you had the Jewish revolts, well, not Jewish, but revolts of some Jews, and some preaching, the apocalypse is here, and then obviously all the Christian writings seeming to, the axe is at the root of the tree, even now, according, John the Baptist. And so, yeah, the end was in the air, so to speak. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Revelation was some separate tradition that would also just happen to be in that milieu, kind of.
Just a quick aside, I've got displayed on my screen share. This is one of the volumes of that journal. And that's
okay.
volume 25, and the whole thing is devoted to essays on just that subject.
This whole issue of this journal is devoted to Bellhausen and his prolegomena.
Yeah, there's and a few others. Derrida's deconstruction, all kinds of interesting stuff. It's really, it's still in business, but they only give you so many free with Logos. So the rest you got to buy. Oh, and by the way, the Logos is changing their company name to Faith Life, like as in Faith Life Study Bible.
Oh, really? I didn't know they were even associated. Because I love the Faith Life Study Bible, the app. I love that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the relationship between the two is. I always just assumed that Faith Life was some kind of partnership or something, but maybe it was just the division of Logos, just like some of the other things like their ebooks and stuff because they have separate apps for e-reading devices and tablets and things.
Yeah, it's interesting.
David asked another question about are there any known interpolations, I guess, into the Revelations of St. John? That's kind of difficult to answer. If you assume it's a Jewish work, then you would say that certain things you can just tell, maybe, that might be themes that are particularly Christian, or something from a period of history that you can identify as not being early, but maybe being late. Excuse me. So I guess it just depends on the perspective you're coming at the book, and then you'll see things. But there's nothing that I would say that anybody has a list that I know of things. This is Christian, this is Jewish. I would have to study that more. I was reading that book, Parables of War, and I just started getting into it, so there might be some stuff in there, and I might have more information later. But that basically, the theme of that book is that if not the majority of Revelation is Jewish. I'm not sure exactly if he's arguing that or not. It seems like he is, but maybe he's going to refine his argument later in the book. But I would say it's got to be both. There has to be a mixture.
I also remember in David Trobish's book, the first edition of the New Testament, that he argued that perhaps the last line or two of Revelation was tacked on by the editor of the New Testament, basically just a bookend it. And that without assuming anything about a previous Jewish background, just that when he was putting together everything, he just basically put that at the end. I don't remember how strong his case was, but it was a suggestion.
Yeah, because it seems to that part seems to make sense as the ending of the Bible rather than the ending of the Revelation. You know what I mean?
There's a logic to it, yes.
It was consciously written as the end of the canon.
Right. Yeah. Or at least it would make a lot of sense in that respect. Although when Revelation was composed, presumably there was no idea that it would eventually end up within a canon of Scripture. So.
And I also remember James Tabor, at least in his blogs, I don't know if he's actually published on it, arguing that it's possible to take out pretty much every reference to Jesus and Christ from it and extract a more original revelation form. So he's arguing at least it's possible that everything that's Christian in the book could be just taken out and called interpolation.
Well, the book I was referring to earlier, and I'll throw up a link in a minute, but basically that was arguing that there are some things that are seen as Christian that can actually not be in any way related. So I'm interested to get to that part. I haven't got there yet.
What book is this?
I'm going to throw up a link in a minute here.
Oh, okay. There's another interesting part. The book is formed. I'm going back to the Talbert book. He divides it up into sections, like the problem, which is identifying the what genre of ancient literature the Gospels are, And then he goes through Boltzmann's criteria for determining if a writing's mythical. Does it have a mythical structure? Does it have a cultic function? And then is the general attitude world-affirming or world-denying? Meaning, does it have focus on eschatology, or does it seem to be more concerned with not this world? And he's talking about some of Paul's views, and I'll just read a little section that I found interesting. As we have seen, Paul and his opponents also had in common a charismatic tradition of Jesus' death and resurrection. His opponents interpreted this tradition in terms of their over-realized eschatology and denied a future resurrection. Obviously, it was already past. And then he cites 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8. And that was something he was addressing that he thought was incorrect, Paul. And then he goes on. In response, Paul used an apocalyptic tradition in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 24 to 28, which set up stages in the unfolding of God's plan for his creation. This use of a scheme of stages in salvation history was the apostles' device for correcting the eccentric eschatology of his opponents. The tendencies we see in Paul in 1 Corinthians 4 and 15 against an over-realized eschatology are closely akin to what we find a generation later in Luke Acts. In Luke, the words of Jesus with a realized eschatology are set in a controlling context so as to prevent their being taken without a future eschatological point of reference. The whole gospel, moreover, is set up so that salvation history is seen unfolding in certain stages, some of which are still future. The Lucan theological perspective and method of operation have roots in an earlier Christian tradition, so basically Paul. The case of Mark, if a widely accepted interpretation of the gospel is accepted, is similar. When the second evangelist was confronted with a mentality that focused exclusively on the miracle tradition and other signs of Jesus' dynamis, in other words, with what is regarded as an illegitimate use of the earthly Jesus, he responded with a gospel in which the traditions of Jesus' authority and power were set in a controlling context dominated by Jesus' passion. The miracle tradition was taken up into a larger whole that included sayings material, a Revelation chapter 13, and a lengthy passion narrative. Furthermore, both the teaching section of chapter 8, verse 31, to chapter 10, verse 52, with its three stylized cycles, Jesus' prediction of his passion, the disciples' failure to understand the necessity of suffering, and further instruction for the disciples, and the apocalyptic section with its warnings against false Christs and prophets who use signs and wonders to lead people astray, chapter 13, verse 22, function to exalt a view of Christ and his disciples, which emphasizes the passion and to warn against the dangers of following miracle workers as such. The new whole includes but controls the way the miracle material is used. So yeah, I like his approach to, they're kind of addressing the eschatological views within their composition of whether it be Paul's epistles or Gospel Mark or any of the other Gospels, Luke, Acts, whatever. Anyway, sorry, I won't read from it anymore. I know.
Because those ready sounds like cricket sounds and stuff.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Well, there's one thing I thought of when you were talking about the ending of Revelation. First thing that popped in my head was what Dr. Price was talking about, where it seems to belong to just the book, because basically it's saying these are the revelations of the official revelations, okay, and you're not supposed to go ahead and continue to be mystical and have visions and go beyond what's in this book, because this is like a final revelation.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so you're not allowed to, add in new stuff now past this point. It's closed, not
Right,
necessarily
so that's
the visions of this book.
So could we say that that the end of Revelation is teaching the end of charismatic gifts?
Possibly, but it could just be, saying that you cannot mess with this book anymore. We've we've interpolated enough visions and insanity into it. Let's not go any further.
Yeah, we find that's. I mean, don't we find that in some of the prophets in the Old Testament too, talking about, this. We've reached the end of prophecy now. So don't go listening to all these nuts coming in saying they're prophets of God. And
Was that in the Old Testament, or was that intertestamental?
Maybe it was intertestamental. I could be misremembering.
Unless you could think of an example I can't offhand, maybe somebody else can, of something from the Old Testament. Probably is. I'm just blanking out.
Trying to remember if Daniel had anything like that.
Possibility like 4 Esdras, maybe? Or whatever they call that, second Ezra. No, 4 Ezras. 4 Ezra, second Esdras. The Greek Ezra.
Right. Yeah.
I can't recall now, but maybe there was something like that in there. That's the one where Ezra has to sit down and recreate the entire Old Testament from direct revelation, and then he has some scribe sitting around taking notes.
Yeah, that's a great passage from Galatians there, John. He's pretty much putting a lid on any further revelation.
From the New Testament.
Yeah, that's from the New Testament. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, maybe I am thinking of intertestamental stuff or apocryphal stuff. I remember in a couple Bible Geeks, Dr. Price talking about, and I thought it was in reference to stuff not related to the New Testament, where people were getting tired of all these supposed prophets coming along, saying that they were on a mission from God or whatever, and writing against prophecy, essentially. But maybe I could be misremembering, and he was just talking about the stuff in the New Testament.
Because I think somewhere somebody mentioned that by the time of the New Testament writings, they considered prophecy as a done deal. But when it actually occurred, I didn't think it was in any of the Old Testament canon that I could recall.
Well, you're probably right. I'm probably just misremembering. Oh, Reuben says Malachi says that the next prophet will be Elijah returned, and thus prophecy ceased with him.
Which means that Malachi not being the last freaking book of the Bible, according to Jewish traditions, that puts it way before the writings. Reuven? Okay.
So does that mean that that would rule out? Well, like John the Baptist wasn't really considered a prophet, I guess. It gets a little fuzzy when we're talking about New Testament, a view or Old Testament view of New Testament prophetic tradition, I guess you could say.
Well, the idea that John was Elijah returned or something, is controversial to me anyway. And I know, like, for instance, Dr. Price would argue that he might not even be a historical person. I believe he argued that. I don't know about that. What do you think? I tend to lean towards historicity, but I've seen the arguments against it, and although I haven't been swayed yet, it's intriguing.
It'd be interesting if it was mythical. I mean, because isn't there stuff even within the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, that seem to hint at some kind of disagreements between people who continued to follow the Baptist versus people who had taken up with Jesus? Like the thing of the fasting, people saying, oh, the followers of the Baptist fast, why don't you fast? Stuff like that.
And also the references, I think, in Acts,
Yeah.
where Paul comes across some dudes that only know of the baptism of John.
So if he's an invention, makes you wonder. Well, I guess it wouldn't really be that crazy because, I mean, even if he was an invention, like, you could still have a community following, say, a cult of John the Baptist group that did actually have disagreements with followers of Jesus, and that would explain why that material shows up in Acts and the Gospels. Then again, if you're dealing with two mythical figures, it gets a little more complicated, I guess.
Well, yeah, the theory is that John was had some relation to the Qumran. So,
Oh yeah, doesn't what is his name? The Dead Sea Scrolls guy.
teacher of
Scholar.
righteousness. Oh, Eisenman?
Yeah, doesn't Eisman argue about that? Or no, he says that
No, it's mainly with James.
Paul was the false.
Yeah, James was the teacher of righteousness, and Paul
Right.
the liar. Or
The
what they
liar,
call it.
yeah. Which is interesting
heard.
because, I mean, even in the text of the New Testament, there seems to be at least peripheral hints of some kind of, let's say, James and Paul not seeing quite eye to eye on certain things. Of course, Acts makes it all come out nice. You know, they all agreed, no problems. But then you get to like Galatians, and it's like, okay,
Yeah, I got to
Paul's like
finish.
insistent that Paul's really insistent that he, didn't get his teaching from anybody else. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, I have to finish that book, The Mystery of Acts by Richard I. Purvo.
Oh yeah.
Because he was making a case for, and it sounded like where he was going, that there's some doubt even about both Acts and the epistles, the interplay between Paul and the so-called Jerusalem pillars, that may be fictional in both locations. So I'm interested in seeing what more he has to say about that. I got too much stuff going. I'm reading too many books at once.
Yeah, it just makes you wonder. I mean, I almost lean toward the historical because it just would be odd to have all this stuff with John versus Jesus followers, apostolic succession, disputes between Paul and the Jerusalem church. This is all just literary creations to address actual disagreements by later Christians. I don't know. It seems kind of I don't know. It seems kind of flimsy to me.
I don't think that's the purpose of it. For instance, say you were a sect that was opposed to emerging Christianity, and it just so happened that your founder was mythical. You know, it's not really that. There's kind of, Dr. Price.
Oh wow!
You decided to pop in.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. How about with you?
Good. Thanks for popping in.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure and honor.
Yeah, we were discussing the historicity of John the Baptist. I can't remember. I thought didn't you argue that there was good reason to suppose that he was not historical, or do you argue for the historical John the Baptist? Maybe I got them mixed up.
No, I'm up in the air about that, but there is a really interesting argument from Robert Eisler actually two related ones. He says that you can't ignore the similarity between John, or Johannine, or in Greek Ioannes, and a sage who emerges on the riverbank to preach repentance, and the fish god Oannes, who comes out of the water to teach wisdom to men. And so it's not just the very similar names. Apparently he was a version of Dagon. And it's not just the similarity of the names, but the fact that he emerges from the water on the shore to teach. That's pretty interesting. Though Eisler also thought that John the Baptist was apparently there was a real John the Baptist, but that he predated Jesus by a generation or so, because he identified him with this man in the Slavonic Josephus who was described very much like John the Baptist is in the Gospels, and he is just called the man, and that brings up issues of the apocalyptic Son of Man, and it has this odd statement that he ate wood shavings. I don't know if that's even possible to do, but it's sort of like the asceticism of eating the locusts and all that. And I also thought of the Nazarene sect, who were supposedly itinerant carpenters, and the wood shavings, and who knows? It's, there's not much evidence to go on at all. But he seemed to think like that. For instance, when Jesus says, "From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of God suffers violence, and violent men seize it by force." And he says that sounds like John is the figure of a previous generation, not just a few weeks earlier, and so he thought that there was this man, and that he was connected with Enosh, Enosh Uthra, the heavenly Enosh, who was one of the saviors of the Mandeans. And of course, the Mandeans look back to John the Baptist as the incarnation of the true Savior. And so these are just odd little dots that Eisler had a kind of plausible way of connecting. So he seemed to think that there were reasons to believe in a real John the Baptist, not a contemporary of Jesus, and a mythic John the Baptist. I suppose he figured these different images had been combined by the time the Gospels are written.
That's interesting. Was that in a particular book he wrote?
Yeah, the thing about Owanes, let's see. What the heck? I'm confusing it with Mead's The Gnostic John the Baptizer. I have one of these magazine-sized reprints from one of these public domain reprint houses like Kessinger or whatever. What the heck was the name of that book? And the one about the Enosh thing, that's in his great book, The Messiah, Jesus, and John the Baptist.
Yeah. Was it Orpheus the Fisher?
Could have been. I don't really remember, though. That might well be it.
Yeah, it says Comparative Studies in Orphic and Christian Cult Symbolism.
I bet that's it. Yeah. The first time I ever heard of Eisler was reading F.F. Bruce's fascinating book, Jesus and Christian Origins Outside the New Testament, which, as you'd expect, is a little bit on the conservative side, but he was a genuine scholar of profound learning, and he has a lot of interesting things to say in that book. But when he talks about Eisler and the Slavonic Josephus, he sort of waves it away and dismisses it, and all the references I ever saw to Eisler were pretty much of the same ilk. So one day in a dusty old bookstore in Passaic, New Jersey, I ran across a copy of The Messiah, Jesus, and John the Baptist and read the hundreds of pages and found it incredibly fascinating. So many interesting and neglected items in there.
What were you saying, John, about the intention of some of the conflicting stuff, like between John, the followers of John the Baptist and Jesus, and then Paul versus James, and then apostolic succession and all that stuff? You're saying that the purpose wouldn't have been necessarily that they were just literary to settle.
Yeah, I was saying that it didn't seem to me like the character of John the Baptist was invented or specifically was a literary creation to embody some kind of opposition to certain Christian sects early on. All I was saying is it could have been, a mythical figure of a group that the group itself and their tenets, their beliefs were in conflict with Christianity, and that was, that's where you see some of the conflicts. It's group conflicts. It just so happens that John the Baptist may have been mythical, or Jesus may have been mythical, or both, but neither one were specifically created to embody anything. Like some of the heretics are probably not actual human beings, but embodied the heresy for which the group was known, like, Valentinians and things. Was there actually a Valentinus or somebody like that,
Yeah.
Well, I tend to think there was a Valentinus, but but of course, Ebion was a mistake. They figured
that's probably the one I'm thinking of. That's the first thing that popped in my head because I've been drawing blanks ever since I got online.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. I was thinking, though, not necessarily that the figures themselves would have been creations for that purpose, but that the particular stories, like like that I mentioned earlier, like John's followers feast, why don't fast, why don't you? That particular story maybe could have been invented for the purposes of settling a dispute between these two different groups.
Oh, in
And the
that
same thing
case,
possibly with James versus Paul, or Paul versus the Jerusalem church, something like that.
I think I just misunderstood what your point was. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah, because I'm sure that there was no situation where a bunch of Pharisees came around and blamed anybody, whether it was in Jesus' time or later, and saying, "How come you don't do this or that?" That whole scene is fictionalized, but
Yeah,
it reflects genuine. I would imagine
Disagree.
genuine disagreements exactly between the Christians who are writing at that time. So.
Right. And that just goes back to what I was reading earlier from Talbert's book, that it seems like there's a ton of stuff that's corrective in nature in the Gospels. John's Gospel, Mark, or Luke, in regards to eschatology and stuff like that. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if the same thing going on with John the Baptist and Jesus and stuff like that.
Speaking of Josephus, though, one thing that kind of makes it that where I kind of tend towards the historicity of John the Baptist was, and I know Dr. Price has argued against this in the podcast, but in Josephus there's the bit about John the Baptist, and the baptism that he was doing was not specifically stated as being for the remission of sins in the same way it's presented in the Gospels. And to me, that sounds like a desperate attempt to co-opt John the Baptist as a forerunner of Jesus, and saying the exact opposite in the Gospels of what's in Josephus. So it almost kind of, to me, it's if it was similar, if John the Baptist was similar in Josephus as in the Gospels in those areas, I think it would be a better case for non-historicity. But because they're like diametrically opposed in some cases, to me that seems a very strong case for John's historicity.
I missed something there. Who is diametrically opposed? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the.
Well, in Josephus, he
yeah.
says about John's baptism not being for forgiveness of sins, whereas in the Gospels it specifically says it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds to me like whoever wrote this thing that we now find in Josephus is trying to make a theological adjustment to somebody's interpretation of John that it's hard to imagine someone in Josephus's position even caring about. It's like, well, it wasn't the water that was cleansing them. They had already been purified by rational repentance or something. I mean, that sounds like a Baptist church saying why we baptize today. And it just seems to me that it's odd. However, on the other hand, the information about why Herod Antipas had John killed doesn't match Mark. So who knows? I mean, that would be a hint that it is genuine information and not a Christian interpolations.
What are the differences there in that case between why Herod wanted to knock off John the Baptist?
It says that he was afraid of John's influence, and that the people hung on every word out of his mouth, and Herod was afraid that if John took it into his head to raise a rebellion against him, he'd really have some problems on his hands. And so before it could come to that, he nabbed him. And then also the business about why John, wait a minute, now let's see. Yeah, the death of John the Baptist, that it was popularly, I'm sorry, the popular explanation for Herod's defeat at the hands of Aretas, or however you say it, the king of the Nabatean Arabs, that was, let's see, Herod lost, and the reason for the victory was that of the Arab was that God was punishing Herod for having killed. Boy, I can't think tonight. The reason for the war between Herod Antipas and Aretas was that when Herod wanted to marry Herodias, his brother's wife, he kicked out the wife he had already, who was the daughter of this Arabian king. He sent her home packing. I think she snuck out and told her father what had happened. He said, "That SOB, he's going to pay for this," and that's why there was the war, which Herod lost. But somehow this dating of the war implies that Herod having that John the Baptist having been put to death recently enough for people to connect the Herod's defeat and the death of John implies John was a figure after Jesus, not before, because this thing happened in the 40s or something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's some strange differences that somehow you never hear about from apologists.
That is interesting.
I think the Herod scholar Nikos Kokinos talks about that in some detail and uses to argue that Jesus must have actually been executed in 36 rather than 30 or 33 like most do.
Yes, that sounds familiar now. I'm glad you helped jumpstart my failing memory. But you could say, well, wait a minute. Maybe that seems to be saying, well, wherever we can put John on the timeline, well, since Jesus is irrevocably associated with him, Jesus too must be later. But if the connection between the two figures is artificial, who knows? Maybe they've done the same thing with John and Jesus that Luke did in Acts with Theudas and Judas of Galilee, that he got them mixed up. It's conceivable. Then there's my crazy theory that the historical Jesus was John the Baptist, based on that thing in Mark where people heard about the deeds of Jesus and said, my gosh, this is John the Baptist raised from the dead. Is it possible that is what people thought, that they had visions of John the Baptist, and others said, no, it's a different guy, it's Jesus. But who knows?
Now, would that make any difference to the stuff in Luke in regards to Quirinius being governor while Herod was king and the census? Would that change anything if he ends up being 36? You're saying he's age 36 or AD 36 when he dies?
The argument that he died in 36.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Well, and if Jesus was born during the census of Quirinius, that'd be like 6 A.D.
Right.
And if he was baptized when he was about 30, then and had 1 year's worth of ministry, the acceptable year of the Lord, that would fit the 36 or 37 date, wouldn't it? Huh. Interesting. But then again, you have to count Herod out of it, Herod the Great, if that's the case. So there's some kind of gross garbling somewhere.
Yeah, the triangulation still wouldn't work out no matter what you do. But.
Yeah, nobody can run the gauntlet Strauss put up on that issue.
Yeah, I've been going through his book on your suggestion, listening. There's an audio recording that I guess a Bible Geek listener had recorded, an audio book.
Right.
And man, he is just so illuminating, that Strauss. Like, I was talking to Reuven about some of the issues with the 2 genealogies, and I was having trouble finding stuff that was a critical perspective on it. Everything was just apologetics, answering the supposed problems. But then I got to that section in Strauss's book on the genealogies. Oh man, talk about an exhaustive treatment. Boy, oh boy. He just...
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of the genealogies, there's the current apologetic argument that we're looking at 2 different genealogies. So one is from Mary and the other one's from Joseph, or one is Luke contains the bloodline, the full bloodline genealogy, and Matthew contains just the legal, whatever that distinction is. Yeah, to me, it's like, okay, those are kind of really stretching it on some things. But I found something interesting today because I had that book, The Horizontal Line, Synopsis of the Gospels by Reuben J. Swanson. And I was showing you guys before online where I had thing up on screen. I had like triangles and stars and stuff like that to represent each word that was the same in each gospel, and there was a harmonized kind of thing. But I decided to do it the way the book actually looks. So let's see if I can get this over there. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of how the book looks, where you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So this is how they aligned all that stuff. But I'm going through the genealogy. We'll skip all that stuff. And you could see things like up until a certain point, you know, from Abraham up to just about the time of David. It pretty much matches up except for a couple exceptions. No big deal. But when it gets to David, one genealogy diverges from the other, where you have Nathan in Luke being the ancestor, and Solomon being the ancestor in Matthew. So any genealogist will tell you that you're going to have two branches, right? But I'm looking down, and it's like, okay, they're totally dissimilar, as you would expect, where there's no matchups, you know, because we're supposedly dealing with two different ancestral lines. But all of a sudden you get down here, and you have the genealogy come together as if, you know, branches of the tree just fused all of a sudden back into one, because you have Shealtiel being the father of Zerubbabel, and that's in both genealogies. So how, you know, that basically is saying that, what, two different fathers had the same kid, and then he had the same son, exactly the same name. So, you know, like somebody like my mother-in-law's in genealogy would tell you that there's no way that anything like that can possibly happen. I mean, you would have to say either it's an error or they're two different people completely, just so happen to have the same father and son. You know, and then back after, as soon as you got those two that are exactly the same names and exactly the same relationship, off you go again into totally different genealogy again. So there's really, to me, there's just no way to reconcile the two. I mean, you could say whatever you want as far as, you know, whose line it is and what, all kinds of, and you can make up stuff like that Jews kept two different genealogies, a legal one and a bloodline one, which, you know, most Jews will tell you, Jewish scholars will tell you that that's a bunch of nonsense. But to me, it's like when I saw that they came together like that and then re-diverged again, to me that just was the real evidence that this is just all concocted. You know?
Right. The amazing thing too, when I got to that section in Strauss's book, every single apologetic you read on these, he's already addressed.
Right.
A long time ago, he's addressed all of them. The Levirate marriage thing. It's through Mary, because Luke says son of Joseph, or Joseph was supposed his father. I mean, he goes through everything you hear today put forward as an apologetic. He's already addressed them a long time ago and shown them all to be problematic. I was just like shocked.
Once I was talking to Clark Pinnock, I think the first time we met back in probably 1979, and I had read a lot of his stuff and respected him, though I no longer agreed with much of what he said, but I knew he had a PhD in New Testament, and I asked him kind of sheepishly, I don't mean to offend, but you got a doctorate in the New Testament. Did you ever have occasion to read Strauss's Life of Jesus critically examined? No, he had not. And that explains a lot, because all these guys are still pushing these arguments that Strauss raised and flattened long before today's apologists were even born.
Oh, yeah. What I really like too is his opposition to the rationalism. Like I was reading through the section where he's talking about the rationalist theories on the star in the birth narrative and all that, and it's just some of the things that I forget the main scholar he references a lot. I can't remember his name. Who is apparently one of the foremost rationalists of the time.
Probably
Some of
Heinrich Paulus.
Yeah, Paulus and one other.
Venturini or Bard.
I think it started with an O or something. I don't remember, but Paulus was definitely one of them. But some of the things these guys thought up, just like, really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Let's see. There's something, speaking of the star, I'd like to try your patience and read you that I was just writing for this book, Blaming Jesus for Jehovah. It's the wrong. Oh yeah, here it is. See what you think of this. Where the hell is it? Yeah. There's a strange inconsistency in Matthew's nativity story, Matthew 2, 1 through 23. At first, we're given to believe that the Magi, Zoroastrian astrologers, simply interpreted the rising of a star, presumably in the constellation of Pisces. This constellation had been assigned to Israel, as other constellations were assigned to other nations. To them, the star signaled the birth of a new heir to the throne of Judea. This is why they seek out King Herod in Jerusalem. They must assume the baby is Herod's own new son and heir, so they go to Jerusalem expecting to find him there. Herod, of course, has no new son, and so wonders if the Magi mean the prophesied messianic king. But he doesn't know the specifics and calls in his scripture scholars who do know. The Messianic king would have to be born in humble Bethlehem, just like David, whose royal dynasty the Messiah would resume. Herod is not Davidic, not even ethnically Jewish, being instead half Idumean or Edomite, half Arab. So he is automatically suspicious. If some schemers in Bethlehem are promoting a local infant as the Messianic king, this means they're planning to act on his behalf, using the boy as a standard of revolt against the hated faux Jewish Herod. He tells the Magi to search for the child in Bethlehem, and when they have found him, to return and report on his whereabouts. Herod secretly plans to send soldiers to kill the child and nip a plot against him in the bud. They locate him all right, but are commanded by an angel not to return to Herod. So they present their gifts to baby Jesus and return home, the Parthian Empire, by a different route, skipping Jerusalem. Herod discovers their treachery, but determines that he will go ahead with his plan anyway, the only hitch being that, not having been given any specific address, he will have to kill every child 2 years, every male child every 2 years, 2 years old and under, to make sure he gets the right one. In all this, the only miracle, if you can call it that, is the angelic warnings to the Magi. There's nothing about any strange celestial body appearing out of nowhere, nothing about the motion of a star through the night sky like a satellite leading them to Bethlehem. Leading them to Jerusalem. No, it was the astrological significance of the, quote, regularly scheduled, unquote, motion of the stars that told them their destination must be Jerusalem. But then, after Herod tells them to try Bethlehem, we read that the star reappeared. Had it disappeared in the meantime? And had guided them to Bethlehem. But why? Herod's scribes, or pretty much anybody else, couldn't have given the Magi simple directions? The star goes ahead of them like a celestial GPS device, finally stopping directly over the house of Mary and Joseph, residents of Bethlehem, unlike Luke's version where they're visitors to Bethlehem from Nazareth and have to bunk in a stable. But no star can pinpoint an individual hovel from high up in space. We're no longer talking about a star as in the beginning of the story of the Magi. We're talking about Tinkerbell. I don't see how you're going to iron out this whopping contradiction, which would seem to be your duty as long as you want to regard the narrative as infallible and inerrant. Does it help if you say, okay, it's a bit confusing, but whatever the point is, it's inerrant. Inerrant but inconsistent. That's great. Why not just get real and admit someone wanted to amp up the supernatural technicolor of the story by adding the ridiculous moving star, failing to notice how it made a mess of the original version? At least this way, the contradictions make sense as contradictions, even though it means dropping the insistence that there can be no contradictions because you're reading the Word of God. But it gets worse, much worse. If we go back, as fundamentalists do, and reread the first part of the story in light of verses 9 and 10, and lo, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. We have to infer that the star was, after all, some new celestial object, and that it was this, not the standard astrological chart, that led the Magi flying through the heavens above them. But then you have to ask why the Tinkerbell star first led them to Jerusalem, the wrong town, and much worse, to Herod, who only became aware of the birth of a potential rival after the Magi inquired about the newborn king of the Jews. It was then and only then that Herod resolved to kill Jesus. Why didn't it lead them directly to Bethlehem in the first place, as it eventually did anyway? Then Herod would have had no knowledge of the birth and no reason to dispatch a death squad to kill all the baby boys of Bethlehem. Look, an angel did tell them to skip Jerusalem on the way home. Why not tell them to skip it and go right to Bethlehem in the first place? If the divine goal was simply to protect Jesus, then why not leave the paranoid Herod out of it altogether? Then Herod would not have known, and there would never have been a slaughter of the innocents. Does this not suggest that it was God's intention that they be slaughtered? He surely knew they would be. In fact, the Bible says it was prophesied. And a quote from Matthew 2:3-6. It is possible with words meaning to us, is it possible with words meaning to us what they do, that a God who, remember, can do anything and knows everything which has ever happened or will ever happen, and who is a loving, just, and merciful Father, would deliberately cause such an unjust and fatal miracle? Is there no escape from the unhappy moral conclusion that God knowingly caused the slaughter of innocents? Yes, there is a way. One can relinquish the arbitrary belief that God inspired the writing of this text and that therefore it must be historically accurate. Then it becomes all too clear that God was arranging nothing, but Matthew, the evangelist, was. And his goal? It was a purely literary one. He wanted to create a Christian version of the nativity story of Moses as it was being retold at the time. We read in Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews how Pharaoh, learning from his own scribes that a Hebrew child should soon be born who would bring Egypt to her knees and deliver the Hebrew slaves, ordered that all male Hebrew babies were to be killed just to make sure they got the right one. Baby Moses was providentially delivered from the tyrant's persecution, though the rest of the Hebrew boys were not so lucky. But the Exodus writer was not really concerned with them. They were just extras on the stage of the play he was writing. It never happened. No Jewish baby boys were slaughtered. In exactly the same way, the Bethlehem innocents meant nothing to Mark. They were just stage props, like wax fruit on the kitchen table on stage. Then I continue to bore the reader into a coma even beyond that. But does that make any sense? Is that reasonably clear, you think?
Yeah, definitely. That sums it up really well. That was part of the stuff that Strauss addressed too. Was like, why were the Magi going to Jerusalem first?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me somebody has interpolated it and created a huge problem where there wouldn't have been one. Boy.
Yeah, that is very clear, though. understood all of it. That was really good.
Because I'm aiming this at folks that are not necessarily that conversant with biblical criticism.
Yeah. So is this going to be in a book?
Yeah, the one I'm calling Blaming Jesus for Jehovah, because the idea is if you believe in the Trinity, then you really cannot pull the old Marcionite fast one and saying, well, yeah, that Jehovah was a pretty rough customer, but don't worry, we've got gentle Jesus, meek and mild now. Wait a minute, you gotta, his fingerprints are on this stuff, the Canaanite genocide, everything, if the Trinity is correct. But since this is such a moral outrage, that given what the Bible says about God's goodness, you just got to drop the notion that this is a revelation from God. The contradictions are of a different kind and are not a problem if you take them as signs, as they are, of purely human authorship. So I'm sort of arguing a couple of things here.
Yeah. Again, I think another interesting thing reminds me of William Lane Craig when he was apologizing for, the slaughtering of the Canaanites by the Israeli soldiers. There's something even in this chapter in Life of Jesus where he brings up some scholars, might have been Paulus, although it might have been someone else too, talking about trying to address that issue that, okay, the particular scenario that's laid out with the star and the Magi going to Jerusalem ends up basically resulting in the slaughter of the innocents. So they had to develop an apologetic for why all those children had to die, and they said that, they were on a fast track to heaven that way, or blah 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 blah. It's like, oh man, and this is in Life of Jesus, and it's like, man, we have like precursors to the William Lane Craig school of apologetics for murdering little children.
Did Strauss deal with the alien interpretation of that?
I don't believe he did.
Aha!
If I may also jump in, I've studied the subject of all the various quote-unquote scientific explanations of the star and have written a book on it, so I have to hawk my wares because I've spent too many years dealing with this. So I
You have
thought
to
I
put
would
the
at least
link
try
in
to
the
share
chat, Aaron.
Sorry?
You got to put a link to it.
That I can do.
One theory I heard, it was because it's moving, that suggests that it was a planet, and I think the theory was that they had inadvertently discovered Uranus.
Oh, that's a goodie. How would they have done that?
Aliens.
Uranus is like
I see.
Like naked eye observability. I mean, the first time it was even discovered in the first place was by Herschel with the telescope.
Yeah, that's the big problem with that theory. Is like it wasn't visible. How could it even been seen?
And with the motions in question, Uranus moves across the night sky even slower than any of the other planets. So you wouldn't have been able to see it move in a given night. You probably wouldn't be able to notice it moved unless you waited a week or two. And that's assuming you could see it.
Unbelievable. What a tangled web we weave.
The other interesting thing that he brings up too is he talks about the people trying to meld the stories of what we find in Luke and Matthew, and he's saying, well, when they fled to, if Nazareth was their home originally, and they also, they fled to Egypt, but then they try and return to Bethlehem, but their only purpose for being there was because of a taxation census. Why would they try and return to Bethlehem? Why wouldn't they just try and go back to Nazareth, which was their home?
Oh, yeah, well, of course, the Romans required people to register for taxes where their remote ancestors had lived a whole millennium earlier. Well, I can see our IRS doing something like that, but the ancients had a little sense. Oh, the great solution to the two genealogy problem that really cuts the Gordian knot is that of Rudolf Steiner, who said there are two different Jesuses. One is, I think, the reincarnation of Solomon, and the other of Zoroaster. And when they got to a certain age, one of them croaked and his spirit went into the other one. So they finally were unified. I mean, if that isn't an astonishing harmonization, that's got to take the cake.
Well, I just happen to have a copy of the Akashic record laying around here where I can always consult it.
Can I get a witness? Man.
I was listening to that one article that you had uploaded for the Lovecraft Geek, and I don't want to give it away or anything, but I remember you, I think it was the earlier article, you were talking about having The Mind Parasites and The Philosopher's Stone on your shelf by Colin Wilson. Mm-hmm. And that brought back memories because I had never heard of Colin Wilson or Lovecraft, and one day I was at a friend of mine's house. His brother had The Philosopher's Stone laying around. He didn't like it. You know, he wasn't exactly a super brain, so he started reading it, didn't like it, tossed it away, and I found it, picked it up, and I said, "Can I have this?" He said, "Yeah," and that was it. You know, after that, I read everything that Wilson wrote from then on for the next 5 years or so. I spent.
That's a tall
he was
order.
pretty. Yeah, it took me about 5 years to get around to getting everything one way or the other.
Mm.
But yeah, my opinion of Lovecraft was formed by Wilson, and I don't know, was it because of the requirements of the stories he was writing, but he didn't seem to have a very high opinion of his abilities.
Yeah, that was part of the big oft-repeated story that in his book, I think The Strength to Dream, he said that Lovecraft had this X factor that so many strange and gifted people had, and that some with this whatever it is faculty become mass murderers, and others creative geniuses. And he said Lovecraft isn't qualitatively much different than Peter Curtin, the Dusseldorf Ripper. And Auguste Derleth read this and took great umbrage, and he wrote to Colin Wilson and said, what are you talking about? If you think Lovecraft was such a crummy writer and so on, why don't you see if you can do better? And so out of that, he wrote The Mind Parasites and became fascinated with Lovecraft from there on in.
Yeah, I enjoyed The Mind Parasites when I read it, but when you reread it, you start seeing a lot of, I don't know, I guess it would be even amateurish things on Wilson's part. Of course, he was probably new to the genre. But yeah, I did enjoy that. I also enjoyed the space vampires. But my favorite, of course, was The Philosopher's Stone, especially the second part where they really get into it, you know, about the ancient old ones. Because, you know, I always enjoyed that kind of stuff, lost civilizations and things. So that really was up my street.
I did a Cthulhu prayer breakfast devotional at the Lovecraft Film Festival a couple of years ago called The Mind Parasites, where I tried to zero in on what like the subtext of Wilson's novel. What are the real mind parasites that he's talking about? The crippling limitations we impose on ourselves and so forth, which I figure is sort of legit since Wilson was a philosopher and saw a deeper meaning in these things.
Yeah, he has once he developed a certain philosophical outlook, he really hammered it in through multiple books. For instance, Introduction to the New Existentialism and New Pathways in Psychology, and a lot of the novels he would work in that philosophy. Once he formulated it, it started appearing everywhere, including the mind parasites and things like that. Even to some extent, well, what later became the book and the movie Life Force, which was originally the space vampires. But it's even in there, you know, and it's also in some of his works on criminality, and then later in the occult and stuff. But interesting, a couple of years ago I bought a book by him. He got into the lost civilization type stuff, where he was hanging out with Graham Hancock and Robert Duvall and all these other ancient lost civilization Atlantis guys. So the guy's all over the place. I mean, I don't think there's a area that he hasn't stuck his nose into one way or the other.
Yeah, one thing I love so much about him is that he was pretty much self-educated and could just follow, I guess, Paul Feyerabend's axiom of research: anything goes. It doesn't matter whether it's respectable or not, or where you got the idea. Anything is worth pursuing, and Wilson sure did that.
Yeah, I had a biography of him. It was part of a series that each volume on each author was written by a different person. It's probably written around the time of probably the late 60s when Wilson was really into Abraham Maslow. And it mentioned that, you know, he had started off as a youth and he wanted to be the one to invent the atomic bomb. But when they because he was really into science and stuff, apparently, when he was really young, mathematics and science. But when it was already a done deal by the end of World War II, then he just abandoned that completely and went a different direction.
Huh.
Fascinating guy.
Oh, yeah. I was very fortunate to correspond with him for a few years. I got to know him and a number of these other great people through editing Crypt of Cthulhu, because there was no internet then, and our letter column became one of the chief places for people to exchange ideas, readers, authors, etc. And I got him to write me a couple of things for the magazine too. It was what a thrill.
Had the internet existed back then, I probably would have contacted him.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I was younger, I had no idea how to, you know, get a hold of her, even if they wanted to hear from anybody.
I heard a funny story, which is neither here nor there, but a friend of mine was, I think, working for Twilight Zone magazine when Ted Klein edited it, and they sent her over to the UK to interview Wilson. And he's sitting there talking with her, and at one point says, "Would you excuse me for a bit?" And he got up and took a bath and dried off and came back down. Oh, brother! Did you know Wilson wrote the script to the what was it, 70s Flash Gordon remake?
No, I didn't, but I know that he's been involved in a lot of stuff because he's a production company and things like that, consultant.
Yeah,
like I said, he's all over the place. It's amazing.
Yeah. Boy.
Now, what do you think? He's in his 70s or 80s?
He's dead now, as a few years ago, maybe 5 or 10 at the most, sadly. In fact, it couldn't have been too long ago, because I was trying to arrange interviewing him for Point of Inquiry, and I don't remember how that failed, but shortly thereafter I believe he died.
Yeah, December 5th, 2013.
Oh, okay. It was more recent than I thought.
Yeah, because, geez, I thought he was still alive because, you know, some of the things that I saw by him or he was involved in were pretty recent. So.
Well, you're right then. Yeah, it was a lot more recent than I remembered.
But what was interesting about one of the last things I read by him is he was helping out a lot of these lost civilization guys, you know, getting their ideas published and all that stuff. And then at some point he decided to write one himself, and it was something that was something about the Neanderthals. But just, you know, if you're familiar with his work, reading that so many years later, so many decades later from his earlier works, and you can see it's still there. All his ideas might have, you know, added a few things into him, but it's the essential message that Wilson always had is still there, even though he's now dealing with, lost capabilities of civilizations, it's still that analogy with modern man and his failure to use all his faculties. So, whether you say in the past ancient civilizations or whatever it was, where people had super mental powers and things like that, it's, he was basically saying the same thing in the Philosopher's Stone, for example.
Yeah.
There's just that continuity.
Do you have my book from Chaosium, The Antarctos Cycle?
No, I don't.
Because there's a novella that Wilson wrote there that's a kind of a sequel to At the Mountains of Madness. I think the only other place
really?
that appeared was online.
Ooh, I'm going to have to look for that. That's got to be good.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
I have to take a quick bio break. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Well, these books up on the screen, I got to write down a couple of these titles and see if I can afford them.
Yeah, he's got a zillion of them there. He uses Logos Bible software, and I think all these are stuff he has loaded into it.
Oh,
So-
my gosh.
Yeah, so as you're going through the books, there's particular programming in the program where if there's a verse mentioned, it will automatically pick up that spot in the text of any book, and you can click on it, and it'll pop that verse up for you in the Greek or in the Hebrew or in English or whatever you want.
Wow.
Yeah, and then there's a concordance option too. So if there's a particular word, if it's in Hebrew or Greek or whatever, you can just pop up a concordance right next to it and look it up too. So you have, instead of having to have 6 books open on your desk, you've got it all right there on your computer screen.
Yeah, I should get that because I have no room on the desk. It's covered by action figures.
Yep. By the way, that scholar was Olshausen or Olshausen. I was
Oh.
thinking of. That was the other rationalist. I couldn't remember.
Well, I wish somebody would translate the old rationalists, but I don't think it's going to happen very soon, especially since some of them had like 11-volume works and so on, thousands of pages.
We were talking about that a couple hangouts ago about it's such a shame that so much of the greatest higher criticism in the German tradition is probably never going to get translated into English. And for those of us that can't read German, unfortunately, probably never going to get to read it.
Well, I can read it well enough to do translations. It took me over a year to do less than 100 pages of Schleiermacher's letter on the so-called First Timothy, which is still waiting to be published. But there's no way I couldn't spend the rest of my life doing one of these books. I mean, there's just no... oh, man.
Yeah, could you imagine doing like having to do one of Bultmann's books, Paul the Apostle of Jesus Christ, some tome, 1,000-page tome. Of course, that one's already translated, but something similar.
Yeah. Jeez. I wish somebody would get to work on it.
Yep, it would be nice.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff that I'd like to see in English.
Oh, by the way, speaking of translations, Frank Zindler's working hard on getting the print version of the Human Bible New Testament out, and Carol's nearly got the cover finished, and it's going to be pretty nifty pretty soon.
Oh, cool. Did like a matter of months or weeks?
I would kind of think a couple of months. But you never know because his publisher gives him a break on the price if he will agree to delays if some other urgent project comes up, and so you never quite know when it's going to come out.
Yeah.
So that was because of his personal friendship with you that AA Press decided to actually print a copy of the New Testament?
I don't remember. Weren't you involved in approaching him about it? I can't even remember now.
Yeah, somewhat. But I think it was mainly that you were looking for somebody to print it, and that you probably were putting your fingers out. I don't think it was just to Frank, but it was some other people. But I think I was surprised that Frank agreed to do it for AA Press. It just seemed like something a little out of the ordinary for their publishing.
Well, I guess he figured atheists might be interested in this because of the acid bath of criticism it pours over the Bible. It was really all your great idea.
Yeah, it's even better because we were worried about, the copyright issues with Signature Press, and that you had done rewrites really worked out good because now we don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah.
But I don't have it. I don't have the electronic text of it. I was just going to wait for the book to come out. Because a lot of the files I get from you are a little out of date from what actually ends up being in the book form. So, sometimes it's almost as much work to try to make it conform to the printed version than it is to just wait, because I would just look at the book and I probably got a text that's very close, and I would just make adjustments as necessary, But, do you know if they're going to do the ebook themselves, or were they planning on an ebook version, or what? Do you know?
I doubt it. I don't remember hearing anything from him about that. I doubt if he plans to.
Yeah, because I know they did ebooks of Bart Ehrman and the Quest of the Historical Jesus. They did that ebook.
Huh.
Or somebody did it for them. I don't know.
Huh. I just finished reading the case against the case for Christ for this publisher for an audio book, and I got to burn the files onto discs pretty quick and send them to them.
That's the first one you did for those guys now?
Yeah.
How many more were you going to do? You were going to do a few more?
Yeah. I figure at least like 4 or 5 more. Andy's trying to find out from Prometheus if they'd be okay with doing some of the, like, deconstructing Jesus in an audio form.
Yeah, because a lot of people love audio versions of books because of their schedules. They can't take time out to read, but they can certainly listen while driving or wherever they're doing exercise.
So, of course, there's a distinct danger of falling asleep at the wheel if they're listening to my stuff.
Well, luckily you do the accent, so that's not a worry.
Though I did kind of curb it in this, I have to admit. I somehow felt self-conscious about it. But who knows, maybe the next one.
I'm sure, though, it's still more dangerous to read while driving.
Yeah, I love the audio stuff. With my work, I have the opportunity to just listen for sometimes up to 8 hours at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, so whatever's on audio, I just love it because I can just essentially read, quote unquote, all day long.
Yeah, I don't know that doesn't count as reading. I've thought of that occasionally. Well, really, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking at the words on the page, but I have a voice in my head reciting them to me, which is pretty much what I do when I read.
What the heck? Yeah, I'd say that counts.
Some would be difficult though. Like one problem I'm having, I don't know Greek at all. I was just skimming through Bultmann's History of the Synoptic Tradition. There's so much Greek he uses in there, but doesn't unfortunately give translation of a lot of it. So I'm trying to figure out a way to read that book, but still be able to identify the Greek somehow, so that I'm not completely lost as I'm reading through the book. I guess I'll just have to learn a little bit of Greek eventually.
Yeah, I took a bunch of Greek in college and at Gordon Conwell. Even at that, I was afraid of reading History of the Synoptic Tradition for that very reason, but luckily I found it was not tough going with a bit of Greek under my belt.
Yeah.
Well, you can't pick up any book. Like today, I was reading a book where it's just throwing out French quotes without translating them into English, and it's like, couldn't you just, add in? It's one sentence.
Yeah, boy. You wonder if if they do it that way just to be pompous.
I think
That's my exact thought.
Even worse for some of the books I've read where sometimes the quote's French, sometimes it's Italian, sometimes German, Latin. The only person I've come across who's actually been nice to me has been Hector Avalos, where he'll put his translation, but then he'll put the original text in the footnote.
Ah, yeah, I'll settle for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, boy.
Yeah, so a lot of that sort of stuff does strike me as being kind of pomposity. I mean, it's like, look how multilingual I am.
Yeah. I had a friend at Jerry Hargett. I think he may teach at an Assemblies of God school somewhere now. But he told me that a great trick to pull is to get a book written in German or French or whatever, even if you can't read it, underline some passages so anybody that looks at it will assume you can read it and have read it. Of course, he was kidding.
Yeah, that's funny.
There's a Bible Geek member in chat. His name is Wayne. He mentions the Original Bible Project, also known as the Transparent English Bible. Does anybody have any familiar with that?
Never
That's
heard of
one
it.
I have not heard of.
Me neither.
Huh. Fascinating. I'm always interested in new versions of the Bible.
Ooh.
I'd love to get
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd love to get a hold of the version of the Bible they have in the movie Constantine, the Bible of Hell, where there are extra chapters that tell you stuff that isn't in the regular Bible.
Did you were you familiar with the comic version of that, or just the movie?
I did read the first few issues of Hellblazer way back in the 80s when they came out, but I hardly even remember that stuff now, so I really only know the movie, which I liked a lot. I'm looking forward to the TV series coming right up.
Oh, I didn't know about the series.
Yeah, also called Constantine.
Will that have Keanu Reeves as well?
Alas, no. I thought he was terrific in it, but I don't know the name of the actor. I think I've seen a picture of him. He is blonde like he was depicted in the comic book, so he doesn't quite look the same. Plus, I think they call it Constantine, which is the way it was supposed to be pronounced. But I really loved the movie. I wish they would continue that, but I'm sure this will be good.
I think that Bible from Constantine must have the what the seal of the seven thunders said.
Oh, I'll bet. I've written that a couple of times. There's a story that Peter Cannon and I collaborated on called The Curate of Temp Hill, and in it he discovers the I think the Secret Gospel of Mark and the Apocalypse of the Seven Thunders, and demonic things begin to happen. And in the Pre-Nicene New Testament, I include thunder, perfect mind, and explain why I think that's actually what they're referring to in Revelation, a Nicolaitan scripture which the seer of Patmos didn't much care for. And I have a story coming out in a horror anthology called, I think, Tales of Cthulhu Invictus or something. And my story in that is called The Seven Thunders. And it has to do with John on Patmos and Apollonius of Tyana and Diotrephes from 3rd John and all kinds of stuff thrown in, everything with a kitchen sink. That's always intrigued me.
So would you say that the mention in Revelation of, sealing up the seven thunders, that was a kind of like a polemical undermining or attack on that Nicolaitan writing? That's what it would... Oh, okay, gotcha. That's interesting.
And there was Brontology, the divination by reading thunderclaps, and there's even like a couple of the Dead Sea Scrolls that have to do with that. So the whole idea is not wacky or unfamiliar, but the fact that it says that this is a revelation, kind of, but we don't want anything to do with it. There are other possibilities. It could be that the like you have the seven trumpets and all that stuff, that you might have had the seven thunders, but some redactor thought whatever it said was untoward and got rid of it. But then in that case, why would there even be a reference to it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe he was just saying, kind of trying to discredit that practice. What did you call it? Brontology, maybe. Is that a possibility that he was just trying to discredit that form of prophecy?
I don't think so, though it could. Something that sounds a little more like that would be in John, I think, chapter 12, where Jesus says, John's counter to the Gethsemane scene, he says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it's for this reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." And he says, "I have glorified it, and I will again." And it said that some thought an angel had spoken to him, but some thought it thundered. And that sounds to me possibly like a kind of disparaging reference to Brontology, but I get the impression that the mode of revelation with the seven thunders is not so much under suspicion as the content. This is something that shouldn't get out. This is better not to be read, and especially since Revelation mentions the Nicolaitan heretics by name, and we're told that there was a Nicolaitan, some church fathers said there was a Nicolaitan text called the Gospel of Eve, or the Gospel of Perfection. Well, the Eve thing kind of fits the content of Thunder, Perfect Mind, and then there's the perfect element in both titles, and the seven, the number of perfection, and all of that. So I have a hunch these are just different names of the same thing, and so that he's referring to an actual known Nicolaitan scripture, which he doesn't want read.
I wonder, does that presuppose that at least in his community, I guess you could say, that it was something that was floating around and that people were reading, that it was somewhat popular?
In those letters at the beginning of Revelation, it says, "You have some among you who tolerate the heresy of the Nicolaitans." Well, I'm going to So you'd have to think, yeah, there must be this revelation that they're reading. He does not want them to
wow, yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, boy, fascinating. Oh, I love this stuff. And John, I know you'll be interested in this. In my story, The Seven Thunders, the revelation of the seven thunders. Well, in this version of it, I adopt this conceit that John did record the seven thunders revelation, but and he recorded it. He had it included in all the copies he made to send to the seven churches. But then an angel appeared to him and said, seal up what the seven thunders said. And so he had to write to the churches again and say, I want you to X that out. And most of them did, but one did not, and so there it still survived and came into the hands of Diotrephes, who loveth the preeminence, and he's using it to rouse up Leviathan, the seven-headed dragon who appears also in Revelation, and Leviathan is the same thing as Cthulhu, and so he's about to bring about the apocalypse of the old ones unless Apollonius or Diana can stop him.
That's a That's a must-read.
Did I sent you that, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was great. Sorry, I never commented on it, but yeah, I really enjoyed that. Was there anything about the Seven Thunders, or maybe possibly slightly like that, in the secret revelation of John, that's apocryphal apocalypse?
Not that you mean the Apocryphon of John in Nag Hammadi?
Yeah, yeah.
I
That's
don't know.
one where Jesus appears in different stages of life or something to different people.
Oh boy, I know that's in
And Peter too.
that's in the Acts of John, right?
Okay.
But I wonder, that'd be worth checking. I don't remember offhand. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
We'll have to ask Doug because he's got every pseudepigrapha and apocrypha book ever written, I think. Don't you, Doug?
Well, not every, but I've got a lot of them.
Bravo.
Well,
there's
mostly
one
they're
for
just
you.
collections.
Have you ever gotten a hold of the Contendings of the Apostles?
Have not.
It's this huge collection of Coptic legendary acts. I'd never heard of it and then ran across it. What the heck is this? And I wound up using some stuff from it in my dissertation. There's all kinds of crazy things out there.
Yeah, I've heard about it through Stephen Huller's book, The Real Messiah, where he mentions some of that stuff. But I had never followed up on it. It did sound fascinating.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I'm just doing a text search through the Apocryphon of John just for thunder or storm. 7, nothing's popping up though.
Ah.
Yeah, because you would think that something like that somebody might have taken that up, like they did everything else that seemed to be missing. Well, let's write that up somewhere. Fill in the gap.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of stuff about 7. So, but nothing particularly about thunder or storms, or unless you guys have an idea for similar words that I could search for that might be a reference to it.
Oh boy.
Well, I guess you could just read the whole thing. It's probably not that long. Huh?
No, it's not really that long.
All right,
You
go ahead.
pages.
Start reading. We'll wait.
He talks about, and the archons created 7 powers for themselves, and the powers created for themselves 6 angels, or blah blah blah. Yeah, so nothing really.
Yeah, boy, I've been meaning to look into that to see where it would fit into a hypothetical reconstruction of the evolution of Johannine Christianity, like on into Docetism and Gnosticism and such.
Yeah, we were discussing that subject earlier, weren't we?
Yeah, do you guys care if I, since we have Dr. Price here, if I ask him about that, or do you not want to hear it again? I understand.
No, please do, because I don't think we ever really... The erudition of the group at that time seemed to be a little on the slow side. Maybe we were all digesting or something.
Well, I'm about done with what is a gospel, and I noticed in the end where he's talking about the world-affirming or world-denying character of the Gospels. He's going through Mark and Luke, and then Matthew and John, and he's mentions passingly Robert Kaisar's, I guess, survey of contemporary investigations on the total process of composition which produced John has yielded a negative conclusion. Scholarship has yet to develop an hypothesis that commands universal support. The alternatives are basically 2. The gospel arose out of a reinterpretation of a sign source, or the gospel evolved from a single stream of tradition. On either of these 2 views, this synthetic model of composition posited for the synoptists seems appropriate also for the 4th gospel. So if one holds to the existence of a sign source, then the Gospel of John came into being either as a synthesis of miracle and passion traditions as in Mark, or as a synthesis of a miracle plus passion / or gospel and discourse material, so that if the signs gospel contained a passion narrative, and then he goes on, the union of these two varying materials, which with their different perspectives resulted in a reinterpretation of them in a new whole. So anyway, I was just kind of wondering where you came down on those two trajectories, and if you agree with Talbert there that it seemed to be pulling on from different areas to create a new whole and reinterpreting them into a new form for the fourth gospel.
Yeah, I tend to go with the Bultmann view of the discourse source, the passion narrative, and the signs source, and that it does involve some reinterpretation. For instance, at the end of it, where it says Jesus did loads more stuff, but this ought to be enough to convince you that he was the Son of God, and so on. Well, if you look at the sign source, it really doesn't have any implication like that. There's nothing about these being messianic in significance or being done by the Messiah or the Son of God. I think Mack says that, and I agree with this, that in Mark, you have these two roughly parallel sequences of miracles, and that probably the sign source is a third version of it, and that the miracles are equivalent to those performed by Elijah, Elisha, and Moses, and that these come from what Mack calls the community of Israel, which I kind of equate with Galilean Christianity, and where they would not have had any interest in a Davidic Messiah, which is a redundancy. I mean, that's what the Messiah would be, the Davidic heir. And so the fact that John ties that in with his messianic Christian framework, he's making the signs of something that they weren't in the original. It's sort of like the way Von Rad says that the Deuteronomist used northern material, some of the sermons given at the shrine of Shiloh, but transferred them to a southern Judean frame of reference when he put together the book of Deuteronomy. I think it's like the same sort of thing. So yeah, I think he did. Oh, or another great example of that, the prologue of John. Bultmann says this must originally have been a Mandean work in which John the Baptist was the incarnate Logos, and that now, of course, since the evangelist converted to Christianity, he's retooled it into a Christian context. So it's most definitely not John the Baptist, but Jesus, who's the light who enlightened every man. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. The other view of C.H. Dodd, that you're dealing with a free creation based on little bits of tradition, little individual mosaics, even less than a pericope, just sentences and stuff floating around. He makes a very good case for that, but there are several places where it seems to me that John is using documents and knows at least a couple of our other Gospels and corrects them, like the Gethsemane thing. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? Hell no. Or the thing that Jesus carries his own cross, whereas it's somebody else in the other ones. And so I lean toward Bultmann's solution, though I have a lot of regard for Dodd's. It is a brilliant piece of work.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned last time too about the stuff in John. You just went over the Garden of Gethsemane thing and Jesus carrying his cross. I can't imagine why people wouldn't be able to at least entertain the possibility that that is corrective, intended to be corrective of other traditions, or not necessarily traditions, but other views. Like, it just seems so compelling to me.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, of course, it's just the harmonist instinct of people that they don't like there to be wholesale rewrites. Like, you don't want to give up. I mean, you have the same problem with that theory that John had with the synoptics. You don't like the idea of Jesus not carrying his cross, or carrying it but then dropping it out of weakness and all that. So they'd rather have bits of both in there, and you have this hybrid version where he carries it a bit but then drops it. One of the many things. Once I did this church newsletter quiz. Which gospel does this occur in? And I had about 10 items, and then the answer to all of them was the same. This is in no gospel. Which one has a crucifixion account where Jesus is nailed to the cross? None of them. Which one has him carry the cross until he drops it? None of them. Which has both of the thieves on the crosses mock Jesus and then one repents of it? None of them. And so on down the line.
Yeah, they're all harmonizing constructions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. There's stuff in Matthew, seems like, too, that seems to be corrective. Like, you had mentioned a bunch of times on the Bible Geek podcast, the thing he's kind of trying to put down the notion that Jesus' disciples stole the body. He's the one that puts a guard at the tomb. Is that right?
That's Matthew.
Yeah. So it seems even there too, there's some corrective stuff going on with the baptism too, and well, maybe even possibly the genealogy. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that's happening. Like the thing with he was what was it? He was the son, as was supposed, of Joseph. Well, there's that old Syriac manuscript that just flat out says he was the son of Joseph, the husband of Mary. And now that's an odd correction to make. It almost looks like that's the only place the original reading survives, and that what we're reading is a correction. And then there are various supplements and corrections to Mark, like, thus he declared all foods clean. Matthew cuts that. And he cuts the strange exorcist thing and substitutes the business about implicitly Paul having the door slammed in his face at the Last Judgment. That's got to be a correction. Or the thing, don't go thinking I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. Far from it. I mean, that is obviously and overtly an intentional correction to a Christian view he doesn't like. And so there is a bunch of that, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to see. You have that book, Let the Reader Understand, on your higher critical reading list. I'd love to see that treatment to all the Gospels, not just Mark, because, like you said, so much of it just seems to be polemical and aimed at the reader rather than really part of the story.
Yeah, whoever wants to come after me, let him take up his cross and follow me. What the heck? What are you talking about, Jesus? I mean, of course, this presupposes the reader knows that Jesus has already gone to the cross. There's no way anybody on the scene would understand that. And again, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, you as the reader, not the synagogue audience. And again and again and again, Fowler's book is so brilliant. I would love to see the same thing.
Yeah, I was watching the debate between you and James White, and you brought that up, and he's like, well, of course they would understand, they were very familiar with crucifixion, but what would lead the disciples to think that Jesus was going to get crucified? Wasn't that a political consequence, a political execution, usually for political crimes? And Jesus here was just, supposedly blasphemy was his crime, not necessarily something you get nailed up to a cross for with King of the Jews tacked onto the top of it.
Yeah, did Jesus go around saying, well, I'm going to get crucified eventually? There's no statement like that except to the disciples in these private passion predictions, which they don't seem to hear anyway in the narrative. Oh, what the heck does rising from the dead mean? So,
they must have known that they had seen the last temptation of Christ with William Dafoe making crosses.
Oh man, what a scene.
Oh yeah,
Worse than the Romans. Oh boy.
that is such a great scene where I love that movie. That is just such a great scene. He's making crosses, and then we of course know what's going to happen. And it's like, dang. Yeah,
What
fantastic movie.
slap in the face. Oh, that's great. I mean, a Zen slap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, would there just to play devil's advocate a little bit, would there even have been any conceivable reason that the disciples could have even suspected that Jesus would have eventually ended up being crucified at that point in time when Jesus is saying, "Take up your cross and follow me"? I mean, would there have been any indication that they would have expected that even? You know what I mean?
I don't think so, because the only time it comes up in the narrative is when, after he heals the guy with the withered hand back in Mark 4 or something like that, the Herodians and the Pharisees get together and say, okay, we got to get rid of this guy. But this isn't public. And or in Luke, when the Pharisees come to Jesus and say, you know, Herod Antipas is looking to kill you. But there's no... I mean, the worst part is that he actually tells them the Son of Man is to go and be betrayed to the Gentiles and die, and they just don't hear it. And of course, he didn't say it to them; he's saying it to the reader. Now, don't worry, this is all going to come out right in the end.
Yeah, and was there any practice of crucifying people that had been found guilty of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin?
Well, I think you can almost let him get away with that, in that the Gospels seem to imply that, well, in John it actually says that the Sanhedrin didn't have a jurisdiction over capital offenses, and so they could have and would have stoned Jesus. I mean, I think it implies they would have stoned Jesus to death, but they didn't want to be connected with it because they were afraid that the people would riot, which it does say, no, let's not arrest them during Passover.
Yeah.
And they do, but they manage to pin it on the Romans, and so they have to say, well, he's really a political subversive. I know you'll be interested in that, Pilate. Well, yeah, I guess so. So that they probably would just as. It seems to me it's easy to read it that way. That they would have stoned him to death, but they probably couldn't have gotten permission to do that, and they didn't want it on their shoulders, so better accuse him falsely of political sedition. So, yeah, that could have happened, but it seems kind of far-fetched to me.
But again, that's not something the disciples would have suspected ahead of time, probably.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there's certainly nothing in the synoptics where we have those passion predictions that indicate Jesus was making blasphemous-sounding claims for himself. I'm not even sure that the Gospel of John means that, since it repeatedly has Jesus' opponents misunderstand him. I said, well, how can this guy give us his flesh to eat? We know this man. How can he say, I came down from heaven? Well, obviously, they're being depicted as literal-minded idiots, but what's the difference when he says, hey, look, I've done plenty of good things. Which of these you think you should stone me for? Well, they're not going to stone you for any good deed you did, but because you say God is your father, which means you're being equal to God. Does Jesus mean that? Or is the pattern consistent that they're interpreting this in the worst possible light? In fact, Jesus replies and says, look, in the psalm it says, I said you are gods. Look, if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and I'm only saying I'm the son of God, what's your problem? Yeah. So I'm not even sure Jesus is depicted as making grandiose claims of deity, even in John.
Would that include the part where he's talking about that he was pre-existent before Abraham, and that it's usually interpreted as, when he says before Abraham was, I am, as some kind of reference to Yahweh, that's an additional misunderstanding of the Jews, that he was even equating himself with Yahweh?
I think Jason Badune is right about that's just mistranslated in the interests of theology, that the same construction is used elsewhere, and it has to be translated, I existed before Abraham. So yeah, it would be a claim for pre-existence, which, you know, the logos in the beginning was the word and all that. But that he's making some reference to I am that I am and all that. Badun just explodes that. He says that's impossible. And so that, I mean, it'd be pretty, Paul, it'd be pretty extravagant to claim you existed before Abraham, but it's not like he's claiming to be Jehovah.
Right. So what he's claiming, though, was that why would they want to stone him for that? That's not blasphemy saying that you existed before Abraham, right?
It would sound a little insane, maybe, but who knows? I mean, I suppose they could say that, well, now are you supposed to be Adam or Enoch come again? But, I mean, there's really nothing that suggests that. It doesn't make...
That's the part that gets me, though, is that, okay, if he's not making any kind of if he's not equating himself with God, which would be blasphemy, but merely saying that he's greater than Abraham, that would be pretty insulting, especially since what went before in the gospel about how proud they are being descendants of Abraham and having him as their father and stuff. But would it elicit that response of where, you know, the crowds never thought of stoning him until that moment that I could remember?
Right, yeah. And when they say, are you greater than Abraham? It's just like the woman at the well saying, well, are you then greater than our father Jacob, who gave this well to his descendants or whatever it is? That's, again, this is an inference they're drawing, and it's not absolutely clear that that's what Jesus is implying, though, of course, Matthew has him say, like, a greater than Solomon is here, so it could be. But I don't know that that'd be blasphemy. Certainly nothing he says at the trial would seem to be blasphemous. I mean,
unless he's Willem Dafoe and says, when I say... What does he say in the movie?
When I say I'm saying God.
Yeah.
That kind of talk can get you killed, my friend. Oh, didn't they tell you I'm the saint of blasphemy? Oh, boy, what a...
Isn't that kind of like an interpretation, though, of that, where, you know, what I was getting at is that, you know, he's saying, I am Yahweh. Isn't that kind of like that interpretation in the movie?
Well, I think of what comes to mind when I hear that is I and the Father are one. That I don't know that implies I am that I am and all that. In fact, Badun points out that in the Septuagint, which is what they seem to be reading, you wouldn't take the statement of God at the burning bush to be I am that I am. He said he is on or something. I am the being. People are kind of reading the Hebrew in there when the Septuagint doesn't give that impression, and if that's the version John was using, it makes it even less likely that that John could have meant that. I'm not saying John didn't think that Jesus was the incarnation of God in some way, and in fact, in my New Testament translation, when Jesus in John says, I came forth from God, I take that as he says, I emerged from the Godhead. And I think there is strong Christology in there. But in some of these places, it seems to me that that John is not trying to portray Jesus as claiming that. But I guess you could say that if his opponents think he is, that would at least provide the basis for their accusations of blasphemy.
Yeah.
Is John's Christology kind of Phalonic in a way, where it's he's an emanation more than anything else?
Oh yeah, I think John, Paul, and Hebrews are they might even have been reading Philo. I mean, you don't have to conclude that, but if not, they certainly were familiar with that kind of Hellenized Jewish thinking, because it's like all the big Christological titles are right there in Philo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Charya S. points out some parallels striking between the phraseology in regards to the Logos and stuff like that between Philo and what we find in New Testament and stuff like that. Anyway, I was going to say too, in Mark at least, it seemed like it was enough that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah and the Son of God, that was blasphemous, because in Mark's account in the Sanhedrin, they ask him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" He says, "I am," and they tear their clothes and they say, "Do you need any more? Do you need any more evidence that he's a blasphemer?" So maybe that was enough to be considered blasphemous. You didn't have to actually say, "I'm God."
But there were other candidates for the Messiah, like Simon Bar Kokhba, who seemed to have been, enough people liked him that not only did they not, as far as we know, regard him as a blasphemer, but they may have invented that first Messiah, the Messiah Ben Joseph, in order to give him a legitimate place in the messianic schema. They don't, like Simon, Akiba, I think, who proclaimed Bar Kokhba the Messiah. Well, they figured he backed the wrong horse, but they didn't excommunicate him or blasphemy. It's just, and does he even really say it? It seems to me that we ought to go with a couple of manuscripts of Mark where he gives an ambiguous.
You say that I am.
Yeah, you say, and of course in Matthew and Luke, it's you say that I am. To me, apologists say, "Oh, that's just a way of saying you bet I am." I don't buy that. I think it's like saying, "If you say so." Well, now, what are you saying there, pal? And now they could have said, "Okay, he's saying yes," but would that have been blasphemy? Even if he did, I don't see how.
Yeah,
Wrong.
Yeah, it definitely seems that you say is not another way of saying, "Yeah, I am." It seems, like you said, it seems like an equivocation.
Mm-hmm. And why doesn't he just say "I am" in all those Gospels? And if that's what he said in Mark, and Matthew and Luke used Mark, you mean to tell me they're going to backpedal and have him say something more ambiguous? Well, you could. What is he, like Obama's press secretary, just weaseling around?
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe that part of Mark got changed later on because of it maybe had that earlier form, and then for some reason Luke and Matthew never got updated in that same way. Is that a possibility?
Because you had individual scribes in churches with individual gospels. They wouldn't necessarily have had all of them to systematically go through.
Yeah.
And we know somebody was fooling with that passage in Mark, because it's just a question of which form of the text is earlier. There's no question that there are a couple of different forms. So which direction is the most plausible change? And I say the classic criterion of what's the more difficult reading. And certainly it's for Jesus to have said, "You say." Of course, there's not a whole lot of manuscript evidence for it, but I don't think that's the overruling thing. You have to ask, who would have changed it to this?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Aaron brings up something in the chat where he says, there's also an Agatha Christie short story that also has this, that Satan was trying to convince Mary to give up being the mother of Jesus. She rejects it, and Satan flies off and is seen by the Magi as being the origin of the star. But that reminded me of that thing that we were working on, the Sufi Q thing.
Uh-huh.
And I got it on screen, but this is what we have currently as Sufi Q saying 33. When Jesus was born, the demons came to Satan and said, "The idols have been overturned." He said, "This is a mere accident. Keep still." Then he sought until he had flown over both hemispheres and found nothing. After that, he saw the Son of Mary already born, with the angels surrounding him. He returned to the demons and said, "A prophet was born yesterday. No woman ever conceived or bare a child without my presence, save this one. Hope not, therefore, that the idols will be worshipped after this night. So attack mankind through haste and thoughtlessness." But that kind of reminded me of that. Is there like an infancy gospel that has something similar to that, where Satan is somehow present or tries to prevent the birth of Jesus or anything like that? Or am I just thinking of just the Sufi saying?
Nothing I
I'm
can
not.
remember.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the nativity of Zoroaster.
Oh, okay, yeah, maybe that's
But
what it
then
is.
that's just one of the many things where the devil figure tries to snuff out the infant as soon as he's born and doesn't get to. So that's not quite the same thing either.
And neither is this. I mean, there's just one little motif that reminded me of it, but I just just thought I'd bring it up. It was an interesting little saying. Anyway.
Well, you know, it is kind of parallel to part of that story because when Zoroaster is born, Ahriman panics because it's his servant Durasan, the chief of the Magi, who wakes up in a cold sweat and knows that his idolatrous religion is doomed because of the child that's just been born, and so we better polish him off as fast as we can, and it doesn't work. But that's a little bit more parallel, I guess.
Well, right here in front of me, I didn't even see this, but there's a reference right underneath it to the infancy gospel of Matthew, 22 and 23. I guess those are chapters. So my system is going really slow. It should have already brought it up. But I have an electronic version of that, so I'm waiting.
It makes you wonder if the evangelists, if they had any thought in mind of Satan being the star leading the Magi to Jerusalem first. Why wouldn't they mention something like that? That it was Satan.
Who is it that says Satan was the star? Was that what's Agatha Christie referring to, or just an interesting thing she came up with?
Well, that and then someone else said earlier that a common Jehovah's Witness apologetic is that it was Satan leading the Magi to Jerusalem. Herod. No,
wow.
no.
I never heard that.
Yeah, and one of my friends too, that reminded me. Che said that. A little late, but I wanted to say that according to Jehovah's Witness doctrine, it was Satan that led the Magi to Herod with the star. And I remembered after he said that I have a close friend who used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and I remember him telling me something like that a long time ago.
Wow.
And then the whole Lucifer Morning Star connection, he's mentioned something about that, but I just completely forget all the details. Somehow he connected it up with that too.
Wow, fascinating. I love this kind of midrashic expansion of the stories.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, though, what the evangelist had in mind. I mean, would he have been thinking that it was Satan? And if he did, why wouldn't he have mentioned anything like that? But then again, there's so many parallels of important figures being preceded by astronomical phenomena. And it seems to me that's probably more the literary form of that whole thing. But
it's also a bit odd, though, that the connection between the Star of Bethlehem, Morning Star, since the Book of Revelation twice says Jesus is the Morning Star.
Yeah.
And there's also some versions of the Nativity where Jesus actually is the star at his own birth.
Wow. Well, I'm learning stuff tonight.
Yeah. In particular, there's it's called the Revelation of the Magi that was just translated into English a few years ago. I think it was part of a dissertation by Robert Landau, if I remember the name correctly.
Huh.
Yeah, and apparently this has been in a few of the medieval tales as well, but basically Jesus is his own evangelist, literally goes to the Magi in Persia, tells them what's what, and becomes the star and is a big shining baby in space, basically.
Wow. Sort of like in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
he had a prescient on that.
the baby had a shining visage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know in the Arabic infancy gospel, it explains that the Magi knew to be on the lookout for Jesus because Zoroaster had predicted his coming. Holy mackerel. And then, of course, the the Apocalypse of Adam has Jesus as one of the reincarnations of Zoroaster. So there must have been some Zoroastrian stream into Christianity or Gnosticism or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it did finally pop up, the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, I guess is another word for it. But it said when Mary and the... let's see. Yeah, I'll just read there. When Mary and the child entered, which is Hermopolis in Egypt, all the idols fell, and Isaiah's words was fulfilled. Behold, the Lord shall come upon a light cloud and enter into Egypt, and all the gods made by the hand of the Egyptians shall be moved before his face. So the commentary of Sufi Q is basically referring to the idea of idols falling, not necessarily at or Satan, and that kind of stuff with the infancy particularly, but that motif occurs in different.
Pretty close, though. Child Jesus, the Holy Family, sojourn in Egypt. That's a great
some
example.
kind of meme. It's like a meme that's floating around. It's just being expressed in different ways.
Well, doesn't this also prove, according to apologetic methodology, that the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, is that what you said it was?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
This must be historical because obviously it fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah. So obviously it couldn't possibly be, a construction based off of something said in Isaiah. That could possibly be it.
Yeah.
Was that the Pseudo-Matthew, or was that the Gospel of James? Because they all are like copying off each other. I can't keep them straight anymore.
Yeah.
Probably related.
Yeah.
But this book has a whole section of infancy gospels. The first one is the book of James or the Proto-Evangelium. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Pseudo-Matthew. Yeah, that one's like 4th century or something.
I mean, isn't that just a great illustration that we have a non-canonical book, an apocryphal book, that is doing the same thing that the canonicals seem to be doing, taking a prophecy from the Old Testament and constructing some unhistorical event out of it. I mean, there it is right there. I mean, that's how easy it is. We just read it. I mean,
well, what would really put the icing on the cake is if you tried to find that and found out it wasn't even in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And
Like,
the author of Pseudo-Matthew is explicit about what he's doing because it says, it's from these verses that I'm creating this, basically.
Yeah, well, Matthew pretty much
still such and such prophecy and quotes it, so he's pretty much like saying, "Yep, that's how I made everything up."
Regular Matthew seems to kind of pretty much do that too.
When he says this happened in order to fulfill the word of the Lord, does he mean this happened in my story in order to?
At least in his head.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd give him the benefit of the doubt, I guess, but it seems to me that's what he actually is doing.
Yes.
But again, doesn't he quote something that's supposedly in the Old Testament, like, and he shall be called, the people shall call him Nazarite or Nazarene or something.
Yeah, he shall
like
be
that.
called the Nazarene.
But that's not actually anywhere in the Old Testament, is it?
No, they think it might be like a loose memory quote of the Annunciation to Samson's mother. He shall be a Nazarite from his birth. Possibly. I mean, who knows?
Also heard, I think, like taking from like Isaiah 9:1, where it says he will be a holy one, and some manuscripts go back and forth.
There might have been something from Zechariah too.
Holy, so they're synonymous. So there might be some translation map that was like that.
Anywhere hair is mentioned.
What's that?
Anywhere that hair is mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, I got to get going here and hit the sack. Sure, great talking with you, gents.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was a real surprise. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, it woke me up.
Okay, see you soon.
All right, take care, Dr. Price.
Yeah, I want to I'm gonna have to save that little tidbit from that Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. I really like that fulfillment of prophecy there. So I guess you could corner a Christian into saying that, oh, this must be historical because it fulfilled prophecy.
Yeah, this section is from
as fulfillment of prophecy by having like trees bending down to give Mary shade and food. How they're whisked into Egypt on a cloud again to fulfill prophecy. And and Jesus fights dragons while a baby. I forgot that.
This is from some of the infancy gospel stuff?
It's also from Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew.
Oh, okay.
Jesus tames dragons.
Gotcha.
I must read.
Wayman was telling me about a Bart Ehrman book that he did with someone else where it's just translations of, let me see if I can find it, of, I don't think it's all, I don't think it could be all, but a ton of the major apocryphal New Testament books.
Probably lost Christianities, I would guess.
No, it wasn't that. Gosh, let me find it. It was with one. It was with another author. Yeah, there's two. The Apocryphal Gospels, and that's Bart Ehrman and Zlatko Plesa. I don't know how to say that name. Features original language editions and English translations of all the texts. Let me see if I can find out exactly what's in it. Oh yeah, there's tons of stuff. Oxyrhynchus stuff. Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel according to the Hebrews, Gospel of Egyptians, Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew's in there, and this is their translations. So,
well, I bet they won't do
stuff
anything.
Sorry?
I bet they won't do anything like Dr. Price did in the Pre-Nicene New Testament, where he actually tries to reconstruct the complete Gospel of Hebrews. They would be all just the bits and fragments of some of those Gospels that other writings, not just Gospels. But
they're not doing, as far as I'm aware, there's no extensive commentary or efforts to reconstruct. It's just strictly translations of the source documents.
Yeah, I think they just want to make it a primary source for students and interested people.
Right, yeah. Just how many apocryphal New Testament writings are there? Or, I'm sorry, apocryphal writings from that. I mean, there's hundreds, right?
Tons.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't really have them all in one book.
Well, that volume I had
on time, because I think they were writing apocryphal stories about Jesus well into the medieval period.
I saw one that said a modern infancy gospel in that book that I had up. The last entry in that section of infancy gospel said a modern infancy gospel, and I'm just wondering, is that literally? It was just done for the book?
Oh yeah.
But if I click on that link again, I'll probably crash Google Hangouts because I have this feeling it's going to happen real soon.
Yeah, I would love it to get a book where it's everything, say, up to like the 4th century or something like that, you know. So you're not getting all this medieval stuff and everything from then up to whenever, up to modern day, I guess. Except otherwise you'd have unlimited amounts of material.
Well, in the Sufi Q thing that's up, Dr. Price was talking about most of these sayings are from the Middle Ages, collected by the Sufi monks or scribes, and you know that doesn't preclude the possibility that the traditions and things like that went into these sayings was not much older. It just they happened to be compiled at that time.
Yeah.
So, you know,
yeah. So the two books were Apocryphal Gospels, text translations, and then Lost Scriptures, books that did not make it into the New Testament. The latter is just him, just his translations. And there's a lot of, well, some overlap between the two books. But Wayman recommended those to me as good references.
And when it also comes to, like you were mentioning with the Sufi statements that they might have an older thing, I also remember there's an infancy gospel about Jesus that only exists in old Irish manuscripts. So it's very distant from the Holy Land and all, but there are some confident scholars arguing it might be one of the oldest infancy stories besides the canonical ones. And yet all it exists is in the language of the Druids.
Uh-oh, John must have crashed. He said he was suspecting it might. He has the power of prophecy.
Speaking of crash, I think I might need to do the same. My coffee's wearing out.
All right, well, good night.
Pleasure being here.
Yeah, it was fun. Got some new faces in here today, which is nice to have. See you, Che. I wonder what the difference between, yeah, Gnostic Bible. That's Barnstone, Willis Barnstone. Wonder what the difference between these two Ehrman books are. That the one that Chave mentioned, the other Gospels, and then the other one, the Apocryphal Gospels. I'm trying to look through the table of contents. Wow, they're even in the same order. I think that's probably the same book, but one has commentary, one doesn't. I don't know. Ministry Gospels, Sayings, Passion, Resurrection. Yeah. Oh, I know why. Because this one, the Apocryphal Gospels has the original languages and the English. That's the difference. Oh, Ruben's cutting live. Outro message. Fun Bible Geek. Dr. Price joined us by surprise. That was fun. And thank you, everybody, for listening.